Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us. We are excited because this is our inaugural speaker series session. And I'll tell you how excited I am. Usually I'm business up top and I'm sweatpants for bottoms, but today I've actually dressed myself from head to toe here at home. So we're excited because we have a special guest. This is again, our inaugural speaker series session. We are the UT Youth Engagement Center here in Dallas. So our program has been in existence since about 1987. We're with UT Austin in the Division of Diversity and Community Engagement. And we're excited because our guest speaker today works very closely with our division, and she's a graduate of UT Austin. So we're excited to have her. Our program is simply about helping students of various ages. We're looking at middle school, high school, college students, and young professionals, and even learners of all ages try to find their path, find their purpose, and we want to surround them with resources and experiences that will get them on the right track. So I'm going to briefly introduce our guest. She'll have a greater introduction by way of some of the questions that we have. But today, our guest is Miss Mandy Price, who is the co-founder and CEO of Kanarys. And so Mandy is a prominent advocate for diversity, equity, and inclusion as the CEO and co-founder of Kanarys, which is a tech platform that fosters collaboration between communities and employees on DEI in the workplace. Just to give you a little bit of background about the impact that Mandy has had, she's been covered by Good Morning America, Forbes, CNBC, Afrotech, and the Business Insider, and HR.com. So I'm going to say she's a big deal. So we're excited that she accepted our invitation to be our inaugural speaker. And so my first question, Mandy, first of all, how are you today?
I'm doing well. I know that we all suffered over the past week with all the snowstorms that happened in the state, and so we were fortunate to not have any huge incidences. We had some frozen pipes and things like that, but I know that there's many still without water. We have some members on our team that still don't have water. And that are staying with friends or family. So hope that everyone is in a situation that's safe, and that if they're not at home, they're able to go home soon.
Absolutely. Thank you for mentioning that. Our thoughts and prayers are with those who are still experiencing difficulties. We had some similar difficulties here at our home, but we made it through. I know other of our team members have had some issues as well. So thank you for acknowledging that. So the topic of our session for today is from lawyer to tech founder and CEO, Mandy Price's journey to entrepreneurship. So we're going to definitely delve into your experiences, but I wanted to start. I love diving into people's backgrounds and seeing a little bit about where they've come from. I think it's very important to hear people's stories. So can you tell us a little bit about your background story, as much as you want to share up until college, so your upbringing?
Yeah, sure. So I grew up here in the Metroplex. I grew up in DeSoto, attended DeSoto K through 12, and really was unsure about where I wanted to go to college. Like most, I feel like folks in high school, you kind of have a sense of what you want to do, but you're still unsure. And so I went back and forth as far as what ultimately I wanted to do from a career aspiration standpoint. And growing up as a child, there was a lot of times where I wanted to be a doctor. So I had all this like, should I go to Baylor? Should I go, and so all these different thoughts as far as where I wanted to end up. And I took a tour at UT Austin, and that was it. Like once I did the campus tour and saw the campus and the environment, I was pretty much sold, even though we continued to kind of visit other campuses. I remember my parents really loving Texas A&M. And like I said, we toured Baylor. We did a lot of the tours throughout the state. And, after attending UT Austin. I was there and a graduate of the McCombs Business School. I then proceeded to go to law school. And so probably within my sophomore year of college, I knew that I wanted to uh, be a lawyer. And so some of the internships and things like that I started to do during the summer were more law focused. And then I went to Harvard Law School and graduated there, and then came back to Dallas and practiced law for 12 years. Experienced a lot of the challenges that many Black professionals face in the workplace. And so decided to resign from the partnership of my law firm to start Kanarys, which, as you noted, really focuses on measuring diversity, equity, inclusion within the workplace. A lot of organizations measure diversity, which is just bodies, right? And not measure equity and inclusion. And so, what we wanted to do was not only create a safe feedback mechanism and loop for employees to be able to really report these incidences that they're having without any kind of fear of retaliation, but then also help organizations really understand from a systemic standpoint the issues around inclusion and equity, and structurally how racism and a lot of the other right biases that we see perpetuate themselves in the workplace. And so how do we start to attack those from a systems based approach as opposed to individual interventions like DEI trainings and things of that nature. So that's kind of my background, but really, really motivated by wanting to have widespread change and wanting to ensure that the circumstances that I went through, which is not unique, right? When we look at some of the data as far as Black professionals, what they're reporting their experiences are in the workplace, wanting to ensure that we were curbing that tide and ensuring that we really were creating fair and equitable workplaces.
Awesome. I'm going to delve into that a little bit more, what you just mentioned, but you dropped some big names. I don't want to just glaze over those names. You dropped McCombs, the McCombs School of Business, which is a huge deal. If I'm not mistaken, I think on LinkedIn, I saw that McCombs is still ranked number 5 in terms of business schools. And then you said there was a school that started with an H. Can you say that again?
Yeah, so then from there, I went to Harvard Law School.
Okay,
And
so with both of those, can you tell me what those, first of all, the McCombs and with Harvard, what did those means in terms of their stature and their ability to prepare individuals for their careers and the networks? Can you walk us through what that looked like for you?
yeah, so when I applied to the business school, at the time, I didn't realize that McCombs was so amazing, right? As far as the U.S. News rankings,
Right.
within McCombs, I was a part of the business honors program. So I applied to that program. And so I had a BHP and finance major. And it was, within my first year, I realized how kind of world renowned the McCombs Business School was. So, the school really prepared me for the next level of success within graduate school. I think if you look at a lot of the ratings and statistics and all of that around how many of the McCombs graduates go on, not only to be successful either entrepreneurs or successful within major organizations, consulting firms, but how many go on and to graduate programs. So within the BHP program, I remember when I graduated, there were maybe 5 other people from McCombs that were in Harvard Law with me, just McCombs.
Wow.
So it's a stellar program, and it very much prepared me for graduate school success.
And then Harvard, of course.
Yes.
Same question. What does that mean? What did it look like? How does having a Harvard degree and that experience compare when you think about some of the other schools or colleagues that you've spoken with and their experiences?
Yeah. So when I think about Harvard, obviously it's a very well known organization, institution, academic institution. Um, but when I think about the culture of the schools, I don't know if that's kind of, you want me to delve into that. I felt like um, it's very different, right? Graduate program from an undergraduate program, period.
Sure.
In any graduate program, There's people that are at different stages of their lives. I remember some of my classmates in graduate school, right? They're already married and they already have children and families and things like that. So it's just very different. But I also think the academic institutions of UT and Harvard are very different. Knowing though that I'm looking at it from the lens of I was an undergrad at UT and graduate school at Harvard, but I feel like UT has a much more, because it's a public institution, commitment to the state, commitment to leadership, and understanding that we have to create the next level of leaders for the state of Texas. And so a lot of the conversations I remember when I was a student were all around leadership, where Harvard is much more research. And a lot of the conversations are around the research that the professors are doing. So I just felt the culture of the organizations were very, very different.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Um, Again, we're looking back even the title of this session, from lawyer to tech founder. I had a transition in my, I guess, in my career trajectory, probably in my, I think, mid 20s, where I was, on a corporate trajectory, and realized that that wasn't necessarily for me, and I needed to be doing something where I gave back, and it ended up being education oriented. So I'm just curious, you know, as a Harvard educated attorney and practicing law, what was the spark for you to kind of shift gears and go in a totally different, probably, you know, I imagine scary, new path.
Yeah. So uh, I've always had this passion for diversity, equity, inclusion work. So, when I was at UT, I did work related to this. Same thing when I was at Harvard, I did work with the Harvard Civil Rights Project. And then when I was practicing law, I was very involved with my law firm's diversity initiatives. So I was on the diversity committee, the women's task force, the hiring committee, led up the Black ERG group as well. So very, very always involved with diversity, equity, inclusion. I think one of the kind of turning points, right, was like I said, I had many incidences that are not isolated to me. Most Black professionals have or deal with microaggressions or all kinds of other things that in the workplace. I think for me is that over time, and as I became more senior, right, in the beginning, it was easier for me to kind of dismiss things or attribute things to me being new in my career. As time went on, and as a partner, as I was still dealing with all these issues in the workplace, I just became to a point, right? And it's hard to describe because I feel like there's these ebbs and flows, but there was a point where I was so used to the treatment, I just figured it was a normal part of uh, working in corporate America. And so I wouldn't talk about the things that were happening, and I'll talk about some of them here so people have a sense. But, I had a partner at a firm, this is before I was a partner, that asked me if I got into Harvard legitimately. And then,
Wow.
but this happens. Like, I can't tell you how many people, some of my other Harvard Law School classmates, or people that even are Harvard alumni that graduated 10, 20, 30 years ago, they report the same things. I know there's a partner at her firm. She's like now the managing partner of her whole firm. And she talked about how people come into her office and see her Harvard degree and say, wow, you went to Harvard. I can't believe, and so there's always these kind of things, right? Where Black professionals and people of color are having to prove their competence and prove themselves. And so those things would happen all the time. And, as they happened as a partner, I remember one incident where I was working, the firm had recruited me because I worked at two different firms because of my expertise in private equity. And we were meeting with a client, a private equity client. And this person who was very high up, was in leadership of the firm, referred to me as the firm's diverse partner in the client meeting. And so I was like, that is extremely, disrespectful, not taking into account my, 12 years of expertise in the field. And so over time, even though I attributed these things to it's normal, this is just what women of color, Black women have to deal in the workplace, the normality of it started to scare me. The fact that I then wasn't shocked, right, as far as these things, and I didn't want to continue to think that this is just normal things that I have to deal with.
Right.
I felt like if we knew that there was a problem with our systems and problems with the way the workplace was operating, that our goal should not be to teach people how to navigate these systems that we know are flawed. And a lot of what I saw with some of the diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives were around that. It was like, this is how to be successful in this organization, right? You talk like this, you dress like this. It was all about training people as opposed to changing the systems. And
Mm,
so really wanted to dedicate my work to changing the systems to create an actual fairer system as opposed to teaching people how to navigate these flawed organizational systems.
wow. Thank you for sharing those instances where you and your colleagues had to face those things. And you mentioned you thought it was the norm at first, which is it's sad, and but it's the level of discredit, just to discredit all the hard work that you've put into and your professionalism. Um, that's sad, but I think out of the trials and tribulation arose a beautiful organization that you now lead. So can you tell me? I think you kind of hit on it, but I guess expound upon why DE&I is important, but then also we have young people on, we have professionals on. How can an attendee who's watching right now or that will watch this on a recorded platform, how can they lead by example in terms of DE&I in their own lives?
Yeah, so first let's just talk about the difference between diversity, equity, inclusion, just to make sure, because I know sometimes people use it all together. And
Sure.
so want to make sure we're all kind of working from the same framework. So, when we talk about diversity, that's someone's identity. So that's your gender, your race, your religion, things that are your background. When we talk about inclusion, that is feeling included in the workplace, no matter what your identity is. So what we see is a lot of organizations may have diversity, but there's not inclusion. The Black employees, the people of color, other underrepresented groups do not feel included in a part of the organization, even though from a diversity standpoint and a number standpoint, there may be, uh, I don't say most organizations don't have a large number of, of underrepresented people, but there might be diversity, but there's not inclusion. And then when we think of equity, equity is no matter what my identity is, I still have the same access and opportunities. And this is where we see most organizations failing, that we know that there's not representation of underrepresented professionals when we look at the C-suite, when we look at the boards of organizations, even when we start looking at middle level management, right? That's where we see this kind of lack of opportunity. And so, what we want to ensure is that we're not just focusing on diversity and saying we need to have a certain number of bodies in these seats, that we need to make sure that these individuals that we're recruiting within the workplace feel included and actually have opportunities to thrive within these workplaces. So I think when we think about what can we do to foster diversity, equity, inclusion within our own lives, within the workplace, I think it's uh, having a continuous learning, right? I think what we've started to see organizations do as well is understand that diversity, equity, inclusion is not a check the box activity. It's not celebrating Black History Month and then never talking about it again.
Right.
It's
Right.
not celebrating Pride Month and never talking about it again. And, that was one of the really big kind of impetuses for Kanarys, was helping my organization plan those same events. And we had those events, but really wanting to further the conversation around, okay, well, there's 50% women that start in this workplace, but then less than 18% make partner. So what is going on? And really starting to understand more about how our systems and structures perpetuate the inequities that we see within not only the workplace, but within society overall. So I think one of the things about the pandemic is that it helped folks to understand how systems and structures can have disproportionate effects on communities and how it can perpetuate some of the inequities that we see. I think for a long time, when people thought about racism, when they thought about sexism, when they thought about any of these kind of biases or isms, right? They would typically think of uh, racist is connected to malice, right? The idea of if you're racist, then you don't like Black people,
Mhm.
or you have an animus towards a certain group. But we know that all kinds of bias and discrimination can be covert or overt, right? It doesn't have to manifest itself in saying, I hate a particular group, that there could also, there's systems and structures that are in place that perpetuate the inequities that we see within our society. So that's not only from the workplace standpoint, we know that's also in the criminal justice system, the way our education systems are set up, the way the housing system. So there's all of these things that we have to change from a structural standpoint. So I think the more and more people can become more educated about the way the structures and the systems have to change, I think is the greatest way that we could start to really build that equity and true inclusion and fairness, right? When I think of what is America supposed to be about and what is, the American dream, it's the idea that anyone can succeed no matter their background. And we know that that's something that we've struggled with in our country throughout its formation. And so I think that is the greatest way to really start to see that true wide scale change, to start to really implement inclusion and equity, is that we have to do it from that system and institutional standpoint. And so I think the more that people can learn about that and learn how do we change these systems, is the best way that we're going to really see marketable change with respect to these issues.
That's powerful. Thank you for sharing that. I think probably since the pandemic and last summer, we've seen, some shifts and some change in mindset, and I hope that it's sustained. And as you mentioned, there needs to be a deep systemic overhaul or change, if you will, from that regard. So I know some people jumped on in the middle of our conversation. So I just wanted to reintroduce ourselves as the UT Youth Engagement Center. And this is our speaker series. This is our inaugural session. And our speaker for today is Mandy Price, who is the co-founder and CEO of Kanarys. So Mandy, um, we talked about your shift from being an attorney to now being a co-founder. So again, we have young people, we have some more seasoned individuals as myself. I'm particularly taking notes on this question because I think it can help all of us. I believe part of why I do what I do is to help point people in the right path on their career trajectory, their educational trajectory, or even the work that they want to do in community or in volunteering. Um, and so when you start something, there are some challenges and obstacles that come along with that. So could you share for our viewers of all ages, what are the ups and downs of entrepreneurship?
Yeah, sure. No, that's a great question. So, I know, especially because of the work that Canaries does, we've talked a lot about the challenges that Black professionals have within the corporate landscape and the corporate sphere. But those challenges exist, unfortunately, in the entrepreneurial and venture capital space as well. So when we look at funding for Black women founders, right, it is 0.06%. So not even one decimal point goes to Black women founders. And so we knew going into this when we were starting the company that there was going to be challenges as far as how do we obtain the funding that we need? How do we grow and scale? And as we're talking to venture capitalists, a lot of them don't even understand our company, right? I remember specifically in a meeting with a VC, and we were talking about how we wanted to provide insight into the differences and experiences that women and people of color and LGBT and all these different groups have. And he replied, he said, "You really think Black people have a different experience in the workplace?" So he couldn't even understand, right, the concept we were talking about, the market potential. He doesn't even think it's a pain point. And so trying to sell venture capitalists on something that they've never experienced was difficult, right? And you have to think this is 3 years ago. So this is before all the companies were putting out their pledges around racial equity and around saying all the things that they're going to be doing to help advance diversity, equity, inclusion in the workplace. So at that time, it was really a battle to show that this was not only the right thing to do, right? Because a lot of times when we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, people view it as a philanthropic or a charitable endeavor. So we have to show them that it's not only the right thing to do, it's the right thing to do with returns to your business as well. That this is something that has an impact on organizations from their own financial standpoint, but there is a market opportunity here as well from an investment standpoint. So we knew that that was a challenge that we had, and it was difficult, right? And it's something that's not only difficult for us, it's difficult for a lot of Black entrepreneurs and for women entrepreneurs as well. So when you just look at the stats around women, only 2% of venture capital funding goes to women. Obviously, when we look at Black and Latinx women, like I said, those stats go down and show the additional difficulties and pressures that those groups have. But it's hard, and I can tell you that it's really difficult too, knowing the experiences that we had and that our founders and that our team had, but still a lot of venture capitalists thinking that we don't have the experience necessary. So that's a common thing that you'll see too, is
Mhm.
that Black founders, women founders, Latinx founders have to show so much more traction, have to go in showing revenues and so many other milestones and steps that others would have gotten funded off of a much earlier stage of their business development. But those things only, I don't want to say made us stronger, because uh, we would love to have gotten funding earlier
Right.
and to have grown our business earlier. But I think it's a matter of having to have a lot of resilience and grit and tenacity. And so I think that we were many, many nights where we had to try to figure out how we were going to make a way out of no way. And so I would say anyone interested in pursuing entrepreneurship has to have that kind of tenacity and grit, because there will be
Tenacity.
many, many people that will not believe in you, that will not believe in your vision, that won't believe in your team and in your company. And you have to have that level of belief in yourself, in your company, and be able to continue to motivate your team. So those were the things that I would recommend. I also think that there's a different level of understanding of entrepreneurship than when I was kind of going to the Macomb School. When I was in Macombs, no one was talking about working in starting their own tech startup. It was all wanting to be investment bankers, wanting to work at consulting firms. So I think because we've seen such an explosion of kind of the tech community in Austin, because of the rise of Silicon Valley over the past, decade, 15 years, we've seen this be viewed as a much more viable career choice. But, when I was at UT 20 plus years, it's crazy to think of that now. No one was talking about working at a startup. So I think that I'm glad students are thinking about it and talking about that and realizing that they don't have to take the traditional career path, and to really be able to forge their own way.
Right. Even now, I'm a firm believer in universities and colleges, and even the K-12 setting. I feel that we should do a better job of teaching young people how to be employers versus only employees. And so I think you're a great example of that. So for the folks who don't know, I keep losing track because every time I look on LinkedIn, there's a new accolade, award, something. Can you, only to show people that it's tremendously possible. Can you just talk through some of the awards and funding and accolades that you all have received recently?
Yeah, sure. So we recently closed our $3 million funding round in January. So to date, we've raised 4.6 million. There's a lot of groups that track how much funding has been raised amongst Black founders and Black women of founders. And so there's been less than 100 Black women that have raised more than 1 million. It's growing. And if you look at the numbers from 2016, 17, 18, you kind of see an exponential growth each of the years since they started tracking in 2016. Um, but when you look at the number of women that have raised 4.6 million, it's less than 25 Black women have raised that amount, which is it's a great honor for us, but it's also very sad, right? If you think of
Right.
the history of the U.S. and how much venture capital funding goes, because it's billions and billions each year. And to know that there's so few Black women, and it's not even just Black women. When you look at Black men, it's not that many more have been able to reach that level of capital. And kind of going back to some of the points we talked about earlier, that's so key and critical because entrepreneurs are usually driven by passion and are solving issues that they have experienced themselves. So if Black founders are not getting the capital, then they're not able um, to solve the issues that our community needs, right? Because those founders are more likely than not to be more experienced with those pain points and be putting forth solutions and products that are for our community. So, um, but going to your question as far as some of the other accolades. So we were recognized by Entrepreneur magazine earlier in the year as me and one of my co-founders. There's two co-founders. All of us went to UT Austin, Star Carter and Benny King. But Star and I were recognized as two of the. So they recognized 100 of the most powerful women making change, and so Star and I were two of those 100. And then we were recognized with Google. We participated in Google's Accelerator for Black Founders. Also was recognized by Dallas Startup Week as the Rising Entrepreneur of the Year. And also by National Diversity Council's 50 Most Powerful Women in Tech. I'm trying to think. I can't think off the top of my head, but I know that our work, as you notice, has been recognized in many legal magazines. And with our funding round, we were very fortunate to have Morgan Stanley invest in the company, Rise of the Rest, Portfolio America, many VC firms kind of supporting us and helping our expansion and growth.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. I know someone is motivated and encouraged by that. And I think that's phenomenal that you've reached that level. I mean, we talked about when you went to UT, but you're still very, very young. So there's so much ahead of you. Um, I have two more questions, and then we may take a couple of questions from the chat. Um, because of the pandemic, and I just see the whole nature of industry changing as it relates to the workplace. What do you see as the new normal or new abnormal post pandemic, or yeah, post pandemic as it relates to the workplace setting? So what we're seeing now is a lot more people are working from home. There's less travel. There, as we are now on Zoom or Teams. So how do you see the landscape of employee engagement in the workplace moving forward? What are the pros and cons of this robust virtual setting that we're in now?
So what we're seeing is lots of organizations come out and say that they are going to be remote going forward, or at least give their employees a choice to be remote only going forward. I think that as the vaccine is rolling out, people have a different sense of when people will be start to go back to offices. But there's many organizations that have already said, into 2022, they're not going into the office, right? So I think that what we can expect is that there will be kind of the continuation of what we see now, at least into the fall, and maybe into the winter. I think that we'll start slowly seeing people start to go back to the office. But what we've seen too with the rise of kind of this virtual only setting is that women have left the office in astronomical numbers because the support systems that were typically there for parents have gone away. What we've seen is that there's been this effect on women in particular of leaving the workforce. And so I think, unfortunately, we will continue to see that. There's a lot of work that's already in work in the sense of bills and different things that companies are trying to do to stop that tide. But with the fact that so many children are doing virtual learning, unfortunately, a lot of women have left the workforce to be there to kind of navigate that virtual learning for their children. The fact that there is not, a lot of daycares, things of that nature are just not able to be open. So that's really what we've seen as far as really negative impact of the pandemic. But what we've seen as well, right, is from a DEI perspective, is trying to ensure that there's inclusion and equity with respect to having access to these services. Because we know that within certain locations, right, internet bandwidth is different, especially within some Black and Brown communities. So even though I may have a computer and I have signed up for the internet, the level of the high speed, going through my community may be very different than in others. So I think that that's something that many organizations, institutions, especially academic institutions, are really trying to remedy. And so I think it's something going forward that people will work to try to address, but I definitely think it will continue to have an impact.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, we're just in a interesting time right now. But again, thankful for the work that you do in this regard. I have my last question is somewhat of a fun question before we jump into the chat and see what questions we have. I meant to ask this earlier when we started. I just like for viewers to get a good feel of who they're listening to and just get an idea of their daily life. But it's kind of two questions. Tell me what is Mandy Price listening to right now? So what's on repeat for you? And then some of us, when we were at home, whether it's the pandemic or whether it's the snowstorm, we've kind of hit the cabinet pretty hard, hit the pantry and the fridge pretty hard. So I want to know, what are you really snacking on right now? So what are you listening to, and what are you really snacking on right now?
Yeah. So during the pandemic, I have become a huge fan, and I listen to him all the time, of Toby out of
Yes.
Houston. And
Yes.
so that's the person that I would say that is always going to be on my YouTube or on my playlist over the past few months. And what am I snacking on? I feel like, what am I not snacking on? Unfortunately, we aren't able to go out to restaurants anymore, so we get everything delivered, and so I feel like that is my only hobby now, is eating and Netflix. So I'd say the last thing that I ate was some spaghetti, but like I said, what am I not eating?
Okay, so what's your go-to Netflix show then, or top three, top two?
So it's always changing, because I feel like you know what I mean, we run out of shows, and so we were huge Bridgerton fan, so watch that. Trying to think of what else. I'll watch a lot of documentaries, and then also watched Ozarks on Netflix too.
Ozarks. Okay. Awesome. Awesome. We know I'm definitely a fan of Toby. So I'm familiar with that. I'm also in the same category of what am I not snacking on. So we can agree there. We have one question thus far. So if other folks who are on right now, if you have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat for Mandy, and Joe Posada, who is our assistant director, will kind of help us field those questions. But how do you break into VC funding? I'm assuming that's venture capital funding.
And so I'm assuming this question means um, getting funding as an entrepreneur, or does it mean they're wanting to be a venture capitalist?
I believe they want to get funding as an entrepreneur.
So one of the things you have to look at is what stage your company's at. So some venture capitalists are only funding companies at the Series A stage, or the Series B, or they only do seed funding, right? And so each of those things, they're going to be looking for different milestones. And so if you're just now starting off your company, usually what you do is you're going to go to angel investors as opposed to venture capitalists who are wanting you to be a little bit further along. So there's lots of angel groups that are set up. There's angel groups here in throughout Texas. And so you can look for those groups. Those groups are usually funding companies at the very, very earliest stages. And so you can get an angel to come in. They usually invest through convertible notes as opposed to other kind of investment mechanisms. But that's what I would recommend is going to one of those angel associations and pitching to them. And again, don't stop because there is it takes many, many conversations before you get funding. And so you can usually pitch in angels, not even just within your state, you can pitch throughout the nation because there's angels throughout the country.
And do angel groups exist for nonprofit founders as well?
It's a little bit more different for nonprofits, right? Because most angels are wanting to, just like venture capitalists, get an exponential return on their investment. So a lot of nonprofits will look for grant funding and do things like that with foundations that will fund them, as opposed to angel groups. Now, if you have a social impact company like Kanarys is, right? We're a social impact company. So a lot of our investors are social impact investors. So that's a different lens. So I don't know if you've already formed a nonprofit or if you are thinking that you'll do a social impact company or a B certified company, which is again a company that is a corporation but has kind of noted that they are a for public good organization. And so I think with that, you will have more angel investors and groups that will invest as opposed through a nonprofit, which I really do think you have to go through more of the grant and foundation process.
So I have three questions, Mandy, and you let me know if you need to hop off for the sake of time. But the first one is recently it was announced that the pandemic has decreased African American life expectancy by 3 years. Will your company address this issue along with others that concern you? This fact has implications on those of us who are planning for our retirements.
So I know we talked a little bit earlier on about some of the motivations behind Kanarys, right? And I know the pandemic, right, has had a tremendous effect on Black businesses. I want to say I don't have this stat off the top of my head, so I don't want to say it wrong, but I believe it's maybe like 30 or 40% of Black businesses have not survived the pandemic. And so we've seen an extreme effect. Same thing when we were doing the PPP loans. Black businesses were not able to access those PPP loans.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things when I think back as far as what was one of the kind of moments what propelled the creation of Kanarys was I was reading some articles around Black infant mortality rates and Black maternal mortality rates. And, you know, these kind of problems with the higher rate of Black mortality, maternal mortality was known for decades. And so they kept trying to figure out why it was. And early on, one of the researchers, sorry, I'm getting tongue twisted, researchers had indicated that they believed it was tied to racism. That when you're going through these microaggressions, when you're going through these incidences each day, you have a higher stress. And so your hormones in your body are different. And so the more stressed you are, the more likely it is for you to go into labor. And so they were able to connect the higher rate of infant or Black mortality, maternal mortality, to racism, to the everyday stress that people have of just navigating the world as a Black person. And so that was really a light bulb moment for me because, you know, we talk and hear a lot about how, you know, obviously the relationship with the police and police causing, you know, the death of individuals, but really understanding that everyday living and the increased stress and the effects that it has that was actually killing Black women and Black children, right? Because the more earlier you're born, the more likely you're not going to survive. Really kind of hit home for me on how pervasive the effects of racism is. So, the American Association of, I can't remember, I think it was psychologists, released a statement during the pandemic as well as talking about the effects of stress and trauma, right, that it produces on Black individuals as well. And so I think that there's much more realization of how all of these things affect people's long term health and their life expectancies. And so, one of the motivators for Kanarys, because we know that so much of where people spend their time is at work. So, a lot of this additional stress, a lot of these everyday microaggressions were happening at work. And so, it's the idea of how can we make that environment better and help to ensure that we're reducing that mental trauma that's happening every day at work, because we know it will spill over and have those health benefits as well. So, kind of to that question, as far as what are we doing directly, our platform is not really tailored around health. It's tailored around how do we restructure the workplace and ensure inclusion and equity. But that alone and dealing with that will have the long term benefits of increasing that life expectancy.
So at the core, it's built into the very fabric of what you're doing to decrease those stressors at work, essentially.
Exactly.
Awesome. And I remember my wife and I have 3 kids. I remember her sharing information about the mortality rates for mothers in labor, Black mothers in specifically, and even the microaggressions that they receive with healthcare providers. So thank you for shedding light on that because I had no clue. As a father, as expectant father, I did not know. So that's very enlightening. So I think a lot of the issues that you're mentioning now, as it relates to the workplace, as it relates to how what you bring into the household, and even in the healthcare field, there's just so many different things that affect our lives that bring on stress and bring on grief. And so again, the work that you're doing is built into the very fabric of addressing those issues. Um, the goal, here's another question. The goal is to break down those systems that are in the way of diversity and inclusion, but for some, it's hard to realize barriers even exist. What steps have you taken to show company leaders and VCs you've approached with your product to help them actually see or reveal those systems to them?
It's a great question. And so, one of the core parts of our product is diagnosing these issues. So many organizations don't understand how to recognize, right, these issues, how to diagnose the systems, what are the research known best practices that should be put in place. So, that is a lot of the work that we do when we're working with organizations. One of the first things we do is we have them do an assessment, not only from their system standpoint, so that we do an analysis and assessment of their systems, but we also do an assessment with their employees. Because, as we just spoke earlier, a lot of diversity, equity, inclusion is around these performative efforts. And so the employees have never been asked about, well, what are your challenges? What are the things that you need changed, right, in order for you to feel like you thrive? Do you feel work is assigned fairly here? Like kind of all these kind of things to really understand the challenges from the employee standpoint. So we do that. We do assessment of the systems to really help them understand the systemic kind of elements at play, and then also making the recommendations as far as those best practices for them.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Last question, Mandy, and then we will let you go for this Friday morning. Aside from DE and I, what other theories or frameworks or people influence your work and interactions with employers you work with?
So when you say theories, we keep a lot of kind of abreast of um, a lot of the corporate sustainability initiatives as well. I think when you think about um, kind of the way companies have traditionally operated, it was really around the mind frame and the mindset of we have to maximize returns for our shareholders, and knowing that profit kind of legally, right? That was what was most of the courts had said was the goal of the company. And so what we've seen is that that has really started to change, that people say corporations goal is not to just maximize their profits, that they have a responsibility to their employees, to their customers, understanding the kind of purpose and role that corporations play within our society overall, that we can't really have this idea of profits over everything else. And so we've started to see the purpose of the corporation and the Business Roundtable and other executives and groups really start to change that charge. And so I don't want to get too into the weeds, but one of the things with respect to the official definition as well, as far as the purpose of the corporation and whether the board of directors of organizations can look at something besides the profits and maximizing profits, that's changed recently. And that is really huge and fundamental because it allows us to say that we can put our employees first, right? We can put the role that we are playing within society as far as releasing toxic chemicals into the air and into the water, that all of those things have to be judged when the board is making decisions. And previously, the boards and the C-suites of organizations couldn't do that. And so those are some of the theories and ideas that we also track, because it's all about being employee centric. How do we show people humanity and dignity and ensure that that's what's guiding our decisions as corporate leaders?
Awesome, Mandy. Well, we are preparing to segue out. And so I just want to, as we transition, just ask if you had to give words of wisdom to an individual, younger, older, that's contemplating or in the middle of a transition to follow their dreams, their passion, something that's really, something that's really big for them in terms of having an impact on the community, whether it's going into business or community ministry, whatever the case may be, and they're just on the cusp of making that jump. What words of motivation do you have for that particular individual?
Yeah, so the first thing I'm going to say is no matter if you're starting a nonprofit, a business, whatever, is that it's going to take a lot longer time than you think for it to be successful. And be prepared, especially if you're leaving something where you don't have income, that, right, that you have that savings set aside. Most entrepreneurs that I know aren't able to take salaries for years, right? I can tell you with our company, it was 2+ years before we were able to take a salary. So I think it's important. And that's why we see so many people doing kind of like the side hustle alongside of them launching their business. But as we start to think about raising capital, raising funding, most investors will require that you are focused on your business full time. So I would just encourage people before you're trying to take any leap like that you do have that savings set aside, because it does take a long time before you're able to really start to see profits, make revenue, and be able to take that salary. The second thing I would say is don't give up. You got to believe in yourself. There will be challenges. Like I said earlier, there will be many, many people that will not believe in what you're doing, but you have to believe in yourself, and you have to be dedicated and committed. And everyone that I know that has been dedicated and committed and hasn't given up, even on the 300th investor that they talked to, right? And when we say don't give up, that doesn't mean that you're not refining, that you're not iterating, that you're not changing, but all of it's a learning process. And so, as long as you have that grit and tenacity, and I believe and I know that you will be successful.
And I heard that you mentioned that word tenacity once before. So if you, as you're leaving this conversation, that's going to be our key word is grit and tenacity. So we thank you again, Mandy Price. As my colleague Tyrone said, you are a treasure. We're grateful for your time. We're grateful for how you and your team are changing the landscape of how companies and corporations and entities of all sorts think through diversity, equity, and inclusion for the sake of many of us who are watching this right now. So again, we thank you so very much, and we look forward to more great work from you.
Thank you.